Hi, my name is Daniel Lettenberger Klein. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in both Georgia and Florida. Currently, I'm the clinical director for Sunrise Detox, which is a medical detoxification facility for drugs and alcohol. Um, in my role currently, I oversee the clinical staff of 2 or 3 counselors as well as the admissions staff for the facility. It's a 30-bed facility that's located right outside of the Atlanta area. Um, and in my role currently, I don't do as much one-on-one client work and patient work that I used to do. But what I am doing and what I think is really useful with my marriage and family therapy background is quite a bit of systems conceptualization. In my role, I'm able to work as part of a very, very strong interdisciplinary team with a medical director, director of nursing, and just a bunch of different roles that come together to work and provide great care for our patients. And I say the word patients, which is usually really, really uncomfortable for me because I'm so used to saying clients and just things like that. But because we are in the medical facility, it is a requirement that I use that terminology, at least with the company I'm working for. So, in my role currently, systems work has been incredibly important because it helps me conceptualize what's best for the patient, how we need to get from point A to point B, how we need to get everybody on the same page, and it really helps me think of all the moving parts. So, how their admission went, how is a behavioral technician working with them, how's everything going together, are they eating well, thinking of all the different components that go into their care, and they're only averaging a 5.1 day stay with us before they move on to residential treatment. So there's so many moving parts, and because of this, conceptualizing the influence all these moving parts can have on the individual's stay and treatment is very, very important, and I found it very useful. Before I was the clinical director there, I was in private practice working with individuals and families struggling with addiction. And when I was doing that, I was using a lot of different theoretical modalities, primarily transgenerational work when I'm working with a family and even with individuals. I am fully trained in EMDR, so I was doing a lot of trauma work hand in hand with the addiction work because often where there's addiction, there's trauma. Not always, but a lot of the time. Um, so what I found to be vitally important when I was working one-on-one with those struggling with addiction is I'd pull the families in all the time, and that was part of my marriage and family therapy training, was just understanding the influence of the important people in their lives and those who they're cut off from, who they're close with, just every important figure. So what I found to be very, very useful was looking at the person just in terms of their entire system, understanding the different relationships they had, understanding what facilitated use, what enabled use, what got in the way of it, and what the relationships were like for those who were getting in the way of the use. So using marriage and family therapy and my systemic education as a tool in my work with those struggling with addiction has been so interesting because there's so much to see in a system where there's addiction. Because again, it doesn't reside within the individual, it's a family disease. So there's so much opportunity for rich hypothesizing and just kind of coming up with different strategies for intervening in a family. Um, Before I came up to Atlanta, I was in Tallahassee, go FSU, for the last 3 years. I served as the couple and family counseling supervisor for an outpatient mental health facility, just overseeing clinicians who are providing individual couple and family therapy. And while doing that, I was also the family therapist for a residential drug treatment center for adolescent males aged 14 to 19 and adult women 18 and over. In my role as the family therapist, I was part of the management team who was helping to conceptualize treatment for every individual who came in. As part of this, I was doing multifamily groups, I was doing anchor management groups, I was doing a lot of groups, a lot of family therapy, and a lot of individual therapy. All the while I was also doing private practice work too. In my private practice, I was doing a lot of couples therapy, a lot of individual addiction work, and some family therapy. In my role as a family therapist, I really got to use my educational background every single minute. What I would do is as soon as we would get a young man into our program, and this is what I was typically working with, my office was housed in the adolescent program, the first call I would make was to the family, and make sure that because they were dependent, that I had everybody on the same page. I understood the whole clinical picture. I got the admissions, the history, everything that I could get my hands on to try and conceptualize what had been going on. Typically, these adolescents had come in through the drug court system, so they had a history of a lot of behavioral issues, emotional issues, and just things like that. So they came to us to expunge their records. In my role, what I was able to do was work with the counselors, work with the technicians, work with the patient or the client there, and their families. And we were able to all work together to try and change some systemic issues that were going on, to try and get the family to help everybody get well and everybody get healthy. So in that role, I would do usually family therapy sessions every week or every 2 weeks with every client that we had, and we had about on average 18 adolescent males. And with the adult women, I would more often than not do individual sessions because their families weren't as accessible, because there had been years of addict behavior and years of cut off from family, and there was often a lot of abuse in their past related to their families of origin. So it was much less likely to get families involved in the adult women's program, but very likely to get families involved in the adolescent male program. So once I had families come in, we did a lot of different things to try and help the client get well and have the family get well too. We would do a lot of individual therapy. I would pull parents in without children. I would pull siblings in. I would do all different presentations of client dyads to try and maximize the effectiveness. So most often what you saw was just different understandings and different backgrounds when it came to understanding what addiction was, what behavioral issues actually were coming from, different behaviors, and just understanding the family as a whole. So many families didn't know how to actually have a conversation about what was going wrong. So many families just assumed that if they punished, it would work itself out, or as they grew up and matured, it would get better. And for some families, that might have been the case, but for many of these families, a lot of their dysfunction resided in the fact that they had no ability to communicate effectively about issues. And so for many of the young men who came into our program, it was much easier to stay high rather than turn to their parent and say, I'm not okay. So in the work that I was doing, a lot of it was intervening and having the conversations they had never had. So facilitating a lot of the conversations that weren't comfortable. And our goal was to make the uncomfortable more comfortable, because once they had change happen in their system, they could fire me, which is my favorite thing. I love getting fired because it may be counterintuitive and a horrible business model, but it makes a ton of sense for working with systems and families. You want to get fired. So my goal was to intervene in such a way that they would have conversations and practice them to the point where they didn't need me anymore. And the young man could graduate from our program and go on and continue to have those conversations and continue to grow. So oftentimes what it took was understanding parental attitudes towards use, understanding the child's attitudes and the purpose for his use. A lot of times there were socialization components, a lot of times there was trauma components. So really just, it took everybody just learning more about the family system to get a grasp on it. There were so many cut off and poor relationships that they didn't know how to get past the behaviors that were being presented. So once we could sit down and consistently show everybody in the system that everybody was here to work, a lot of things could change. And not all the time, a lot of things went back to the same patterns once they left my office, but at least in that moment things were different. So in the work I was doing, I kind of explain it as though I'm on the speed bump on the way to the airport, right? The purpose of it is just to shake everybody up and make you aware of your surroundings so you can slow down and notice things. So that's what I tried to facilitate for the adolescent males and the adult women at the residential facilities, was just to help serve as that speed bump to help everybody just open up and say, all right, where are we? Where do we need to be? And are we on the way to where we need to go? And if we're not, what do we need to do? So marriage and family therapy was incredibly useful for my work in that facility, because if I didn't understand the family as a whole, the system, and how it presented and how dysfunction can appear transgenerationally, I would have been in a lot of trouble. So because I had that educational background, I was able to really conceptualize and help families conceptualize just what their system looked like and what might need to change. And before I was ever doing residential treatment, family therapy, clinical directorship, I was an outpatient counselor for substance abuse services. I was working in a rural county. I was working with people who did not want to be there. who were court mandated and who were just trying to get their probation officer off of their back. So that was doing outpatient counseling and intensive outpatient counseling. And I had not had a lot of history in that, so I had to turn it into marriage and family therapy, because that was what I knew. So what I would do with these individuals is I would have them bring family members in, and I would have them talk about their families of origin and try and get everybody on the same page. And it was really doing that that helped set me up to do other things, like move on to the residential facilities. So marriage and family therapy has been essential in my work with the substance abusing population, because it helps me see the system as a whole. It helps me understand where ideas came from, where belief systems came from, where emotional systems came from, and really help everybody work together to understand their system so that they have more control over the outcome. So the substance abuse field is phenomenal. It's so entertaining, it's enjoyable, it's always changing, it's continuing to thrive, which is upsetting, but at the same time is good for business. But without marriage and family therapy, I could not imagine being able to conceptualize a single family or person that I come across.